Welcome to WCAT. I'm Kiki Latimer, and I'm your host for the Catholic Bookworm. And I'm very happy to have with me today Annette Wilcox. Welcome, Annette.
Thank you.
Annette has written a very interesting book called Bumping the Dock, a story of God's grace and an 18-wheeler. It's a fascinating book. I enjoyed reading. Annette, you want to just start us off with a quick prayer?
Sure. Dear God in heaven, I pledge my allegiance to you. I give you my life, my work, and my heart. In turn, please give me the grace of obeying your every direction to the fullest possible extent. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So you want to start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, yes. I was the child of an academic, a math professor, and was brought up not to believe in God, that God was something people used to believe before we knew better. And when I was 20, I married, and about 6 months later became a Christian. I'd always been looking for God. And so then we had 4 children, and I've kept recycling myself, as a friend said. I was a technical typist in the days when that existed, and then later on I went to college in my 30s and got a master's degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages. Took the children to Hungary for a year, the 3 who were still at home. And later on, I taught in Tanzania. I worked for a library for about 5 years in there too. But I reached the age of 50 and came back from Africa and took care of my mother for a while. And then I could never find a job again. And then I went deaf in my left ear. And then I was running out of money. And in desperation, I went into trucking school and got a CDL. And wrote the book about the first 3 months that I trucked.
Quite an amazing journey from librarian to driving an 18-wheeler. What made you decide to write about it, write Bumping the Dock?
I think when I write, and I don't write all the time, but I write when things bother me in a certain way. And I think at first I thought others might be interested to read about what it's really like to be a trucker and be in a truck. And I wanted the beginner's perspective. So I wrote that book in the first year that I trucked. I got a first draft of it anyway.
How long were you trucking altogether?
More than 12 years, more than 1 million miles.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So it wasn't an easy journey, though, getting into trucking.
No, I was terrified anytime the first 2 years, really. And kept calling on the Lord. And I wrote the book for the reasons I said, but I wanted to get it published to witness to what God had done for me.
It really was a daily journey for you.
I found out, as that woman from Rwanda did, that the more desperate you are, the closer the Lord is to you, almost to a point where you'd like to be desperate because you feel so close to the Lord.
That's interesting. We talk about, finding God in suffering, finding him sometimes in our moments of frustration or anger. You had plenty of those behind the wheel of this huge vehicle.
Yes. Yes. What truckers call four-wheelers or car drivers can be very annoying. Yeah.
So you had a gentleman who helped you, who was your trainer.
Yes, and I wrote the book about him, and we're still in touch. I've pointed out to him on how unusual it is to get a book written about you when you're not famous, and he enjoys it very much.
Did he like the book?
Well, yes, he claimed never to have read a book before, but he read this one, at least more or less, and he shared it with his family and friends. His mother read a draft of it while she was still alive. That was lovely.
That was lovely. So all of a sudden you were thrown into this rather intimate situation with this gentleman that you didn't know. You're sharing a cab, you're sharing living quarters. What was that like?
Well, I team drove a couple of years later on. It's like living in a walk-in closet with someone you don't love. What it has broken up many marriages, though sometimes people get along okay. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I've only been in an 18-wheeler once in my life. And it was because I was hitchhiking from Rhode
Mhm.
Island to New York, and my husband and I got picked up by a driver. And
Mhm.
I remember just sort of crawling into that back bed space, which was really tiny. And of course, I wasn't in there for like 45 minutes when, of course, I had to pee.
Oh,
And I looked around and I was like, there's no bathroom here.
uh-huh.
So I can't even imagine. So, of course, I was mortified to have to say I needed to go to the bathroom. So he had to make a special stop for me, which was kind of funny looking back on it. But
Yeah.
that's the only time I've ever been in one, and there's not a lot of space in there.
I think a lot of people have never been in one. Was it a cab over truck or was it a one with the hood sticking out in front?
Think a cab over. I don't know. I climbed up onto the seat and then up into a bed area.
Well, I
So,
think it was smaller than what I experienced,
oh,
probably.
good. It was, yeah, it was interesting though. Yeah, it was once was enough for me. Although
Mhm.
when I was much younger, in my 20s, I remember thinking about going into something like that and driving an 18-wheeler. But it was just sort of a passing fancy at the time. I also thought about flying airplanes too, because my father was a pilot.
Mhm.
Um, but I didn't do either of those. When I was little, I wanted to be an ice skater, a professional ice skater. And my mother used to tell me I was always skating on thin ice. So that was
Yeah.
that was enough. So what was the message about God's grace that you really, that's so important that you wanted to get this story published?
I wanted to testify to him and what he'd done for me. Wonderful he is. He was always there. And he sees the other side of the tapestry. He's got all the threads in his hands, and these things happen that look like coincidence, but he knows from the beginning that they're going to happen. I mean, just as I pull into a truck stop, a truck drives out, and I'm the one who's lined up on that place, and I get it. And nobody else sees it really, but I do.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. I always pray for parking spots and I always get them because I know that God has known from all eternity that I need a parking spot on this particular day and time. Um,
Once in a while, I get the message of, no, that's not your place. Leave that for someone else.
yep, yep. Yeah, you just kind of know when you're
Mhm.
where you're supposed to be. There is that sort of divine guidance if we're open to an awareness of it, I think.
I think so.
I think it's always there. Some people just, people will say to me, oh, I've never had that. And I think, no, you have had it. You're just not aware of it. There's a certain heart awareness, mental awareness to God's grace, I think.
Well, when I was first a Christian, or maybe 5 years in, I was also, besides being an Episcopalian, I was in a charismatic non-denominational church. And I first heard the idea of listening to God, not just doing a laundry list of prayers, but actually that prayer should be listening as well. And it took me years to get up the courage to do it because I thought I knew exactly what he'd say. Oh, good, you're finally listening. Now, there are 53 things that have to change immediately. Number one, you have to stop doing this. And number two, you have to start doing that. And so it took me years. At the same time, I could see some of the people around me really knew God. And I knew of God and loved him and believed in him, but I couldn't have said that I knew him. And I wondered what was wrong with me that he didn't want to know me. But the key turned out to be listening to him. And when I finally got up the courage to do it for a year or more, the only thing I ever heard was, I love you.
Mm.
And so that was the start of the relationship in a sense of listening.
A few times in my life, I can think of at least twice, I heard God very clearly and did the opposite. My will be done, not yours kind of thing. And it's very interesting when I look back on those moments, like, well, that was a really bad idea. I really should have listened. So I do try to listen. But I think you're right. We are often afraid that, we kind of know that listening often means we might have to change our ways.
Yeah.
So you encounter with, I don't want to ruin the story for anyone, but you do encounter a situation at one point in this beginning time where you have a real difficulty, you have a breakdown of the truck, and you're asked to lie about the situation.
I don't know that I remember that. I don't lie easily, and in fact, I hardly ever lie at all.
Well, you chose not to, but you lost you lost the job because of that.
Oh, you're talking about towards the end of the book, yes.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
asked to drive a truck that didn't have a functioning speedometer or tachometer. And it was a wrong thing to do, but I also don't think I could have done it. I would have, the very idea of trying to do it would have panicked me.
Right.
So,
But it cost you the job at the time.
It did. I know what I'd do now. Now I would find a highway patrolman and I would say to him, please put this truck out of service for me. And then he'd do it. Yeah.
So
No,
you really explain, you explain a lot of the inroads of the trucking world, how difficult it is.
It's an exploitive industry. And people only get paid when they're driving. They get paid by the mile. If a shipper or a receiver holds you for 6 or 8 hours, you earn no money. Unless you're working for a good company. My last company was a very, very good company, and they would have given me say $100 if I lost a day, but I could make 2 or 3 times that if I was driving all day. So it's
right. That's really, maybe talk more about that. It's really, can you make a living wage trucking?
Yes, in the end, I was earning a lot of money at it, but I started off, what did I start off at? 23 or 28 cents an hour. When I finished trucking, I was making, not an hour, a mile. I was making 65 cents a mile. And if you drive 500 or 600 miles in a day, that's quite a lot of money.
So it would seem to me the system kind of encourages people to drive way past their limit. How does that work?
It used to be so. And now it's much, much harder if it's even possible because they have e-logs, electronic logs that are keeping track of you to the minute. So people used to play all sorts of tricks with paper logs and often get away with it. But that really can't be done anymore. The owner of the good company that I trucked for said that, and it was a family company, so he'd grown up in it. He said when he was younger, people on paper logs, that the drivers used to walk in and they always looked dead beat. They just looked exhausted. He said that had changed since e-logs. That doesn't happen so much anymore.
So there's a little more safety on the road now.
But you hear all sorts of stories. Johnny Wattenberg, the man who trained me, had an identical twin brother. And one of the tricks that they used to get up to was that one of them would go home and the other one would take a truck and both logbooks and run both logbooks for 10 days and then come back and they'd do it again. And so if they were stopped, then the other one was always supposedly in the sleeper.
Oh.
Tricks that twins can play that the rest of us can't.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So what was it like just to be on the road? And I mean, family kind of gets left behind, right? Friends and family. How do you connect with people when you're out on the road?
More so than when I'm just in one location. A friend I made in Michigan told me that at first she thought I was rootless because I was a trucker, but that she eventually realized that it was the opposite. I was a trucker because I was rootless. I've lived so many places in 10 states and 4 countries, and my children are all over the country, and of course, friends are scattered across the country too. So I found that trucking, I saw them more often than I commonly would have.
So you're connected with people on the road.
And I'm used to holding friendships by phone too. I don't know
Right.
that you can make friends by phone, but I have my best friend. We've been friends almost 45 years, and we've gone as much as 5 years without seeing each other, just by phone.
Yeah, I understand that. My brother and I Zoom. He's out in Illinois and I'm here in Rhode Island.
Hmm.
So we do quite a bit by phone, which is wonderful that we have that technology now. And I mean, this technology right now is amazing. You're what, in Oregon?
I'm in
And
Oregon, yeah.
yeah, and I'm in Rhode Island. And so we have our 3 hour time difference here. But,
Yeah.
it's
Actually,
incredible, the technology.
the sun is coming up and is about to, probably you can see it's changing the picture. If you need me to jump up and shut the blind, I could.
So far, it's fine.
So,
Yeah, it gets in your eyes. We'll have you do that. Yeah.
okay.
So, I mean, most of us think of trucking certainly as a man's world. Um, is it?
Yes, I think it largely is. Of course, then a woman has a different experience of being in that world than a man would have. I came to realize that I live in a nicer world. I live in the world of little old Christian ladies, and it's very different from the world of 20-something-year-old 6'5" men. They would have a totally different experience. I liked this world of men, really. They were more direct than women sometimes are. The whole trucking world. There are some aspects of it I don't like is the way that men tease each other just constantly, or at least blue collar men. They're just always trading insults, basically.
Yep. Yeah, that kind of, that's their way of camaraderie, I guess.
It is in a way, but if you're a guy who's 5'7", it's kind of cruel. The number of jokes about your height.
Interesting. Yeah.
That and the joking of the same kind as in Africa. So one day I was detailed to drive a truck 112 miles. It was going to be auctioned off. And then the owner of the company was, two of us were doing this, going to pick us up and drive us back. And the truck that was going to be auctioned, he'd gotten tired of it. It was eating antifreeze at $40 a gallon. And it was a different brand from the other trucks. And he just didn't want it anymore. So I got ready to drive it up. And as I was getting ready to go, this director of safety came out, making sure he had an audience. And he said to me, well, have they issued you with your gas can and your lighter yet? And I was still taking him seriously at that point. I said, no, Craig, what would that be for? And he said, well, that's so if it breaks down on the road, you can pour the gas on it and light it. And laughed at the expression on my face as I understood it was a tease.
So I'm curious, I think a lot of our readers, our listeners here are going to wonder, as a woman out there in this man's world and also just the whole trucking and on the road, did you feel safe?
Yes, I did. I think in the whole 12 years, there were only a couple times I didn't feel safe. One was pulling into a rest area in the New Jersey Turnpike or whatever they had for a truck stop. And I found a place on just about the last row at that time of night. And I literally didn't get out of the truck until morning. I'm not even sure I got out of the truck in the morning. I may have started driving a little before I did. But it wasn't really a sense of danger. What I did find was that there were always people around if I go to a truck stop, so that even if one man meant trouble, the other three standing nearby would have impeded him from that. And I talked with somebody who's been trucking since the 70s, a man who said he's never felt in danger in all those years.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah,
So there is a camaraderie that you find at truck stops of people sort of looking out for one another.
I think so. Years ago, women used to take a lot of flack for being on the road, I'm told. But at a certain point, probably in the 70s or 80s, apparently the male truckers decided, hey, they're out here doing the same thing we're out here doing. They're trying to support their families and just accepted the situation. There still aren't a whole lot of women truckers. There are more wives or girlfriends who ride with their, you know, with the male driver.
How many women are there out there, the percentage?
It's supposed to be 5%, 1 in 20, or a little higher than that now, I think.
I'm trying to think if I've ever, when I'm on the road, noticed that the trucker was a woman, but I don't think I have.
That's one of the things that keeps a woman safe, is that when you're not sitting in the driver's seat, it just looks like the truck, and the probability is that it's a guy in it, you know. I did have prostitutes bang on the side of the truck occasionally at night. I'd be asleep.
Right, right. Yeah, I never thought about that aspect of trucking.
Didn't
Yeah.
answer. They're called lot lizards.
Sad. Oh, so God's grace works, you had just so many situations where you were sort of in a panic, learning how to drive this monster, how to maneuver it into spaces. You have this title, Bumping the Dock. Maybe tell us what bumping the dock means. Many people won't know.
It's trucker parlance. They have those loading docks as are pictured in the books, and what you do is you back the trailer up to it very exactly, with the back doors open, and then they can load or unload the trailer, whichever they want, and that's called bumping the dock. You try to bump it gently.
Every time I go to say the title, I would call your book God in the Dock, because are you familiar with C.S. Lewis's? Yes.
Yes.
I kept saying I'm reading God in the Dock, and I was like, no, I think it's bumping the dock.
Yeah. I wrote the book, as I said, in the first year that I trucked. I got a first draft, and I used C.S. Lewis's advice, as I always have when writing. His advice was to handwrite a first draft, because he thought that the clicking of the typewriter keys distracted people from hearing the real rhythm of the sentence. So I've always done first drafts by hand, and then as I used to be a manuscript typist, the second draft is just word processing it these days.
So obviously, I mean, you have so many details in your book. Were you keeping a journal along the way?
I had the log books and various other paperwork at that time, so I was able to be very exact about it. And it was also fresh enough in my mind at the time. Even now, I have a list of the places that we went and maps with them on. I've kept those things. So that's, but the thing was that I was also dog tired during that first year, and the rule was I had to write 3 pages before I could go to sleep. So I just wrote 3 pages night after night after night, and eventually, got it.
Yeah, fascinating. I have a good friend who was a trucker. He's retired now. His name is Rich, and he has told me amazing stories, some similar to yours, of just being in these situations with a truck, trying to turn getting into a situation, and then how do I get out of here? We don't realize sometimes, you get in, you're driving a little Corolla like I am. It's pretty easy to get out of most corners or dead ends or whatever.
You can do a U-turn.
Right.
Yes.
Tell
One
us
of the
about
worst situations. Yeah, I got into a dreadful situation one time, and God was so good, as always. I was in Chicago, practically downtown Chicago, an industrial area anyway. And I turned into a place where I was going to do a pickup, and realized just too late that I had turned into the parking lot, not into where I should have turned. I needed to go one more. And immediately a security guard came walking over. There was no room at all. The only thing I could do was to back out onto the street. Well, you can imagine how the Chicago drivers would have liked that. But I had this security guard there to stop traffic, and along comes a Chicago policeman, and then everyone behaved very correctly and silently while the trucker backed out onto the road at a right angle, and then I went forward to where I needed to be. So that was one.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, often if there's an intersection and I see an 18-wheeler is trying to, get out into that intersection, And I realize especially if there's no one right behind me, I will back up at the red light because I know he needs a lot of birth to get through that intersection, you know. So it's obviously a difficult thing to drive.
It is, yeah, and especially in tight quarters. The second year I drove when I was team driving, we were in downtown Miami, Florida, and we came up on a place we were going to deliver, and they told us, no, you need to come at it from the other direction. So we had to go make turn left down an alley and then go up and turn right and right again and right the third time. And that third time, I had to turn right from the right-hand lane. And when I brought it around, it was a tight turn. I found myself face to face with a woman in the left turn lane, poor thing, and she was terrified. And there was nothing I could do about it. I had to wait until she figured it out and cut around me to the right to give me room. But I felt sorry, but there was nothing to be done.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of our roads really are not designed for an 18-wheeler.
Especially back east. Oh my gosh. I used to live in Massachusetts and back in the 80s and drove a Grand Torino, and that was terrifying enough. But the idea of driving a semi on some of those roads is horrifying.
Yeah. Really amazing. Yeah.
One of the unexpected side effects of writing this book is various people I've met, mostly women, who've said, I'll never look at a semi the same way again. But I think it puts a person in behind the driver's wheel for them. And another friend of mine said, and I was sitting at an intersection and there was a semi and I thought I should let him go. So I let him go. So I realized, okay, now I'm doing driver's ed, which was never my intention with this book, but it has done it.
Yeah, I think it does give us this very personal, intimate view of what the trucker is going through. And especially, I mean, the training time was fascinating to me. It really takes quite a while. Maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Johnny Wattenberg was just the best. I don't think I'd ever have the guts to train. And he had experiences. He woke up one night being flung out of the sleeper berth because a student had taken the truck off the road. And he'd done it for a good reason. There was an accident up ahead of him and there were children standing in the middle of the road. So it was in Texas. He went off the road, sort of through what must have been a very shallow ditch and wound up on the side road, and everything was actually okay. But my goodness, you have to be able, the trainer has to know where the difficult parts are and be able to be sort of ahead of the student on it. And Johnny was very good at that and taught me all sorts of good things. How to, if occasionally you'll see a semi pulled off on the shoulder of the highway. And there are ways to do that and ways not to do that. In particular, when you go to get back onto the highway, you need to get up to some speed before you pull back into that left lane. And so he taught me to try to get up to 40 miles an hour and then pull back into the lane. And by then it's not so much of an emergency, but I've seen truckers just start out and pull into that lane right away. And then everyone has to go around and very quick. It creates an emergency situation, really.
It really does. Yeah. Oh. Wouldn't get me doing it.
No,
how old were you when you started?
How old was I? 53.
Yeah. Wow, so that was really brave.
Well, I was desperate. And a woman at church read it not so long ago, and she said, I don't know how you did it. And I said, well, I was desperate. And she said, well, I've been desperate, but it never led me to do anything like that.
Right.
But I guess behind that, as you were talking about, I always liked driving. And we did long car trips from the time I was little, and I was pretty good at navigation. And you need both of those things if you want to be a trucker. Yeah. Especially you need not to just follow your GPS blindly, because people have gotten into terrible trouble doing that.
Right. right.
in cars or trucks. I remember years ago reading someone had followed his GPS up a ski trail in Vermont and had to be towed out of it. But yeah.
Yeah. I think there was a joke on that on The Office once where they drove right into a lake or something. Yeah, I followed my GPS a few times and wound up in the middle of nowhere.
Mhm.
You know. I had a situation somewhere out there. There's a trucker who basically saved my life about 5, 6, 7 years ago. I was driving out to Illinois, and I could see that there was a series of really bad thunderstorms coming, as they only have, like in the Midwest out there. And I had how many? I had 5 or 6 grandsons with me. We were headed out to a Batman wedding. So it was a wonderful wedding we wound up going to. But on the highway, this series of thunderstorms, big ones, were rolling through. And so I pulled off into a rest area and we waited one out. And then I sort of looked at the weather report and I said, I think most of it's gone by. So I got back on the highway with all these kids in the car. And the weather report changed like quickly. And the next thing I knew, we were hit with torrential rain. It got dark, the most amazing rain I've ever seen in my life, like suddenly. And I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see where the side of the road was. I couldn't see where the middle of the road. There was no way to pull off the road. Because I didn't know where the side of the edge was, and I knew somebody could hit me from behind because I knew whoever was driving behind me also couldn't see me or anything. You couldn't see more than 10, 15 feet in front of the car. And up ahead, just barely, I saw the taillights of an 18-wheeler. And I got my car right behind him or her. And that was like my guardian angel. And I stayed literally no more than 20 feet. I couldn't see him. If he got 30 feet in front of me, I couldn't see anything. So it was follow this truck. And I didn't know how he was seeing, but I was just trusting this giant guardian angel in front of me. And I stayed behind that truck for probably 20 minutes in absolute blindness, except for those little red lights in front of me until he pulled off. He knew where he was going and knew how to get off the highway. And I just followed him off the highway and into a truck stop, and never got a chance to thank him or speak to him. But it was literally this massive guardian angel that probably saved our lives right in front. I was aware the whole time that God had placed this truck in front of me to get us safely through this unbelievable lightning storm, thunderstorm. Yeah.
Yeah, I've
So
been in a few of
wherever
those.
he or she is out there, thank you. And again, that grace of God, um, that was the only vehicle I saw. You couldn't see anything else. And I've never followed another vehicle so close in my life. I knew if I lost him, we were goners. It was really frightening.
That's a very dangerous situation, huh?
Oh, it was horrible. It was really, really terrifying. I just said to the kids, start pray. Everybody pray and be quiet and don't breathe, and just like behind the wheel, clutching the wheel. But I was in the situation. I knew it was God's grace had put that truck there for me. Yeah, I was clear as a bell that this was a massive angel I was following. Yeah, it was a sense in which there was a great beauty in it. We were just cocooned in these little lights and just follow him. Yeah, but I've never been that, to stay behind an 18-wheeler and trust that he's not going to hit the brakes or, I would have been on top of him if anything had gone wrong. I think he knew I was there and probably knew the situation that I was in.
Did he have his flashers on?
I don't think so. No.
It seems likely. Very often you put your flashers on if you're going below about 50 miles an hour, and cars will do it too in that situation.
We were moving, we were going 50 miles an hour at least. So it was terrifying. And I think everybody sort of knew, like you couldn't slow down because somebody was going to hit you from behind because they
Yeah.
weren't going to see you until they were on top of you. So he stayed between 50, 60 miles an hour, with me inches behind him. Yeah, yeah. I don't believe his flashers were on. No,
You
my
can,
flashers were on.
you can pretty much trust a trucker not to hit the brakes to the point where if one does, I'll say, "Hey, what's up with you, buddy?" What?
Right.
That there needs to be some good reason for it, anyway.
I was brought up driving by my dad, and I remember him saying, when you're on the highway, you never hit the brakes unless it's an emergency. You don't touch the brakes. So that's always been sort of in the back of my mind, that I'm always surprised when people brake on the highway. I'm like, what are you doing? You know,
Oh.
sort of a warning sign to me. Yeah. One of the questions you mentioned to me was the idea that people were surprised, you were surprised by people's reactions, to you
One of the
trucking.
funniest ones was on the New Jersey Turnpike one time. I came up to a toll booth and there was a little guy in the toll booth had some like New Jersey accent, and he looked up at me and he said, "Whoa, you're not what I expected."
I love it.
Another time I was driving north of Phoenix, between Phoenix, Arizona, and Flagstaff, and lost a tire on the trailer. And I called into my company, and they wanted me to go somewhat farther. I wasn't happy about it, but I did it. So I pulled in a place where I'd arranged to meet the man who was going to change the tire. Truckers these days don't change their own tires. There's equipment. You would have to be able to strong arm a much higher weight than I could ever strong arm. So they get professionals to do it. And often they'll come out and meet you on the side of the road. But this was Saturday. Anyway, I pulled into this truck stop, and the man who came out, I don't know if he was a Navajo or a Hopi, one or the other. I got down in front of the truck and he said, "What's a nice lady like you doing driving a truck?" And then changed the tire.
That's
Yeah.
cute. How did your family feel about you trucking?
They were worried. They were worried for my safety by and large, and several friends as well. Are you sure? But they gradually relaxed about it, I think. And I had several of them rode with me at least out to a delivery. Several friends did that too, and a couple of people I took on the truck for a week or more. Yeah.
So you did this until you retired?
Yes, I did. In fact, I retired twice. I retired the first time because I had a book contract with Sebastian and I needed to get the manuscript to him. And the company was running me so hard I was having trouble getting my laundry done, much less. I had a full manuscript, but that's not all the way there. There are
No.
the diagrams and things and going through it time out. Oh, it took me about 3 months after I did retire of just working at it. And then came COVID and the lockdowns, and then I began to feel that as though I was in solitary confinement inside my apartment. So I went back on the road for another year, almost year and a half. But
Just to move, just to get out and move.
yeah, and it was very nice. I enjoyed it a lot. It was funny the way I actually quit. That I had always said that I was only trucking as long as the Lord wanted me to, that I wouldn't move the truck an inch without that. And one time, as I was driving along, it came into my mind, you know that thing you said? He said, that may come into play. Oh. And I had prayed, I did a lot of praying on the road. Previous to that, years ago, I suddenly had this intense desire, and I said, Lord, please send us prayer warriors. And I felt the answer in French. J'ai un peu pensé à toi. I was kind of thinking of you. I said, Lord, we may be in trouble here. What? So, but I got the sense that he wanted me to retire and do what I am doing now, go to Mass every day and pray a chaplet and a rosary and a bunch of other prayers that I pray every day. So I said, well, okay, Lord, yes, but help me retire, help me quit. So at that point, I had picked up a load of organic milk somewhere in Ohio. I think I was driving it to Wisconsin. The next morning, I got up and I did a walk around on the trailer, and there was a puddle of milk the size of a dinner plate at one end of the trailer. So, in other words, it was leaking. Well, that was horrifying. It was Saturday morning, and I called in, but you had very minimal dispatch on Saturday morning. So I reported it, and I went on to just somewhere near La Crosse, Wisconsin. There's a big warehouse of organic type foods. Well, I walked in and it was no trouble to them. They said, oh, that always happens with this supplier. We're working with them. And they didn't have a problem. But now I had a problem because I had milk all over the floor of my trailer. And I needed to go drop that trailer at a beverage company in La Crosse, and it needed to be clean when I did it. So I looked on, I Googled the subject. I knew there was a truck washout place about 30 miles away. And it said it was open till 3 p.m. on Saturday. And I called them and I said, is it true? Are you going to be open till 3? And the guy said, well, we were thinking of quitting at noon because it's raining. And I said, please wait for me. And they did. They did wait for me. So I called them again as soon as I was unloaded. I said, I'm starting now. I'll be there at such and such a time. And the truck wash was basically closed, but a boy and a man had stayed around and they washed it out. And the water that came out of that truck just looked very milky. So I went in to pay. It was a little place and they had a diner there too. And since the truck wash was basically closed, I needed to pay the woman in the diner, who was of a certain age, in her 50s maybe. I went to pay her and she looked at me and she said, are you still driving a truck at your age? You should retire. A strange woman. I've never seen her before or since. Well, I went on. I got to Nebraska the next day where I was going to deliver the load on Monday morning. And I called the first thing in the morning, I called one of the brothers who runs that company and said, Kurt, would you call me back when you get in? I want to talk with you about how soon I could quit. And then I finished the delivery and I made the sort of mistake you make when you do something at the last second. Anything you do at the last second is potentially dangerous. I got out, I was going to sweep out the truck. And then I thought, no, I'll just go down to the truck stop and maybe I'll get it washed out. And so I drove off with one of the trailer doors open. Well, that's very bad. You're not supposed to do that. But I couldn't stop on the road I was on. So I made a right turn onto a more major road that had a shoulder and I pulled off and I went back to shut that trailer door. And I had heard, like the day before, the Lord had said, I may have to hurt you. I'd said, oh, Lord, yeah, okay. And so I went to shut this door. There was a very stiff wind and I was pushing against it. And there was a box that was welded on anyway that came down and hit my head. And suddenly there was blood everywhere. So I went back, got in the truck and got on the phone to this same Kurt. And he answered this time. I said, this isn't what you think it's about. I'm hurt and I need to get some medical help. And we talked about it. And I drove to the truck stop and I walked in and there was blood all down my face and people were sort of not looking at me like you do when someone's injured and you're not going to help. One of the women at the truck stop drove me to an urgent care place because I was in such a small town that they didn't have taxi service anymore. And all they had to do, they didn't even take stitches. They just sort of glued my scalp back together. But from then on, everyone at the company was just fine with me retiring. Yes, this minute, forget 2 weeks notice. Fine, how can we help? They took me off the load that I was supposed to be on, and I just went back to headquarters, which was about 50 or 60 miles away, and got off the truck and got on a train and went home. Anyway, that's how the Lord worked it out.
Wow. Wow. Before you became a liability.
I've been home ever since. Well, it was more like sympathetic. I don't know. They were very sympathetic. And I had run, oh gosh, I'd done more than 800 loads for them over the years. So
it's funny how things at the time, it feels like some disaster, but especially when you look back on it, you can just see the grace that's just there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Putting you in a different place, a different direction.
I think it was time to retire. I'd started being more absent-minded than I wanted to be. I'd actually locked myself out of the truck one time with the engine running. And even at that, God was very good. I was pulled through a fuel island at the largest truck stop in the world is called, it's a TA in Walcott, Iowa. It's about uh, eastern Iowa, about 20 miles from the Illinois border, from the Mississippi. And you can park 900 trucks there. And so, and they have all sorts of services, mechanics and everything. So when I locked myself out of the truck, I did have my phone and I called and they said, well, walk over and see. I walked over to the mechanics and they came over and they were in that truck within 30 seconds. They just stuck something down the window and pulled up on it, and there I was. And the reason I was locked out was because the extra set of keys I always had in my right-hand jeans pocket had fallen out on the sleeper berth, and I hadn't noticed it when I got dressed, so I didn't have them. So it was time to quit, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Is there anything, I know we're running out of time. Is there anything that you wanted to mention or talk about that we didn't get to?
Yes, it's a second book that I've written that I just signed a contract with Sebastian on. It's called Sharon. And I wrote most of it before I wrote Bumping the Dock. I started writing it 20 years ago in Africa. And it was the same reason as I wrote Bumping the Dock, that I was bothered in a particular way by a child that I had in a Montessori classroom 25 years ago. I was a teacher's aide for a combined second and third grade class. And this little girl, her father had just been diagnosed with stage 4, I think, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And she was one frightened child. She was anxious, and but she was a very good student. She was a lovely little girl. So we had some of the things that happened that year, I made into the book, and I made it come out the way I would have liked it to come out, of her coming to the Lord. I put my little poodle from 30 years ago in it too, and a priest from Tanzania. And it's a book that's part fiction and part not. I don't think I'd have it in me, excuse me, to write a book like the Ring trilogy or Narnia books that are where you create a world. It's so much easier. And it's the reason I don't lie either. I don't have the mind for it. To all the unforeseen complications that you get into when you differ from reality. So most of the things in the book really did happen, either with Sharon or with me as a child, say, or not a whole lot of fiction in it. And yet it is fiction. It was 2 of my 3 daughters have read it, and they find it deeply confusing because it's true, but it's not true. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to reading it and hopefully seeing you again after that's published.
Well, that would be lovely. Yes.
Well, this has been interesting and delightful, and I really thank you. Where can we get the book? Bumping the Dock.
Bumping the Dock, you can get it from Amazon. And more than that, actually, you can get an audio version. I'm the one. Sebastian said he'd had 4 authors try to do audiobooks. And if you Google the subject, you always see, you can do this yourself. And it's not true. There's an Audible standard that the background has to be very quiet, exceedingly quiet. I wound up going to a professional studio in Madison, Wisconsin, and they helped me. I read out loud all the time. I read out loud an hour a day, even now, to a friend. So I did it, and it's available on Amazon. But
wonderful. And also, of course, through En route Books and Media.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where you'll find this interview. Well, thank you. Would you like to end us with a prayer, please?
I'd love to. This is a prayer that was in the Anglican Church and comes from a long time ago. And when I first became a Christian, I just loved this prayer, and I still do. Almighty God, unto thee all hearts are open, all desires known, and from thee no secrets are hid. Cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of thy Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love thee and worthily magnify thy holy name through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you. I remember that prayer because I also was brought up in the Episcopal Anglican sort of tradition before I became Catholic, and it is quite beautiful.
It is. I don't know why we don't have it. Maybe we do somewhere.
Maybe we do somewhere. Thank you so much, Annette. This has been delightful.
And thank you for the interview.
And
Bye.
hopefully we will cross paths again.